Hi pals and welcome to a new video. I'm Kate and today I'm reviewing The Seven Dials Mystery by Agatha Christie and also the Netflix adaptation that came out last week. A quick note to say that this is a spoiler-free review until the last section of the video. I will say when we enter the spoiler section of the video, and I will also flash it up on screen as well, so don't worry about that. Let's start with a quick review of the book because the context is really important here. The Seven Dials Mystery was published in 1929 and it's actually the second in the Superintendent Battle series, the first being The Secret Chimneys. If you've read that, you will notice that a few things carry over into Seven Dials. The country estate Chimneys features in both of them, and as do a fair few characters. I would say it's really important to note that The Seven Dials isn't a classic Christie puzzle mystery. It's very much a thriller in the 1920s style, and to be blunt, thrillers are not Agatha Christie's best work in general. The Seven Dials mystery revolves around political intrigue, the criminal underworld, there's a secret society called Seven Dials, there's a kind of mysterious invention that everybody wants to get their hands on. I will quickly run through the opening of the novel to set the scene. Seven Dials Mystery opens during a weekend party being held at Chimneys, the country estate. Chimneys is being leased by Sir Oswald and a Lady Coote. Sir Oswald is a very successful, shrewd businessman. Think like nouveau riche, new money. Chimneys itself belongs to Lord Caterham and his daughter Bundle, who's very much the bright young thing. She's kind of energetic and witty and really intelligent. One of the guests at the weekend party has a bad habit of sleeping well into the early afternoon, so his friends play a prank on him where they set up 8 alarms to go off very early to wake him up. They do go off in the morning, he doesn't wake up and is found dead. Bundle later finds a letter which casts quite a lot of doubt on the official inquest verdict on his death and the investigation. The thriller really starts from there. Let's talk about what I enjoyed about the Seven Dials mystery, and I think it's really important to know, if you haven't read this, this is meant to be good fun. It's meant to be funny and it's meant to be a bit of a romp. I read from the HarperCollins edition, which has an introduction by the crime writer Val McDermott, and in that introduction she argues that the Seven Dials mystery is meant to be a pastiche on the 1920s thriller. You're not meant to read this with a straight face. It's meant to be a bit of a send-up. It's Agatha Christie really having a good time and having a little bit of a joke around. I don't know that I completely buy into that, but I actually think overall it's a really good approach to reading this, and that you'll have a much better time of it if you just accept that this one is really quite light-hearted. She also points out, and honestly you can't miss it, that in terms of tone, this is pure PG Woodhouse. You could lift paragraphs from Seven Dials and put them into a Jeeves and Wooster and they really wouldn't be out of place. For somebody like me who really quite likes Agatha Christie's sense of humour, although it does fly under the radar quite a lot, and who also adores PG Woodhouse, this is just such a joy to read. And I do think that the comedic elements and the overall tone of this are the novel's strength. I also really like Bundle as a character. She's very much the kind of quintessential Agatha Christie plucky heroine. She also has a really lovely romantic storyline in the novel, which is one of my favourite parts of it. And because this is a thriller, you also get the kind of big reveal of kind of the mysterious secret society. I found all of those things good fun, but I will say that The Seven Dials Mystery isn't Agatha Christie at her best. Her early thrillers have the habit of missing the mark a little bit. Let's quickly talk about what didn't work for me. Agatha Christie is just the master of the puzzle, mystery, detection, fiction. There really isn't anybody better than her. Thrillers, like I said, are not her strong suit. I did review one of her late career thrillers on the channel last year, Endless Night, which I do think is really, really good. But overall, I would say the thriller genre just doesn't really play to her strengths. The mechanics of the plot in Seven Dials don't really work, which is one of the reasons why I find it so interesting that Netflix chose to adapt it. And I will also say that the plot pushes like plausibility to its absolute limit. If you've read other Superintendent Battle novels, The First, The Secret of Chimneys, or Murder is Easy, you will know that Battle is kind of a non-entity, to be honest. He's very indescript. He's meant to be very intelligent and shrewd and like one step ahead, but rarely he's not very memorable. And I'd also say, and I've had other people mention this as well, that Seven Dials doesn't really make a lot of its kind of country manor house settings. There are 2 featured in the novel, and then you also are in London for parts of the novel as well. We have these kind of secluded, sweeping country estates, and yet they're never really brought to life, which I think is a really missed opportunity. So that was one of the reasons why I was most excited to see the adaptation, actually. And so overall, I would say this isn't Christie at her best. It's not Christie at her worst either. And I do still think that the worst Agatha Christie novel has a lot going for it compared to others. I do think, though, that if you approach this with I'm just going to have a good time in mind, you can enjoy your reading experience. Let's now move on to the Netflix adaptation. I had some pretty significant issues with it, but before I go over them, let's talk about the things that I liked. Overall for this, I thought that the casting was really quite strong. Mia McKenna Bruce as Bundle worked really well. Martin Freeman as Inspector Battle I thought worked, although he isn't physically what I had in mind. That's because I do think Hobbit or Dr. Watson whenever I see him. And even minor characters like George Lomax and Socks in this, I thought were cast brilliantly. The actress that plays Socks in this, incidentally, is the same actress who'll be playing Mary Bennet in The Other Bennet Sister. She has like a tiny role in episode 1 of this, but I thought it really captured the silliness of the character from the novel too, so I love to see her. Jimmy Fezziger, I also thought was fantastic cast. He is basically exactly as I imagined he would be from the novel, which is always wonderful when that happens. And one of the other strengths of this was that visually, I thought especially Chimneys was absolutely beautiful. It opens in that weekend party, and the opening scenes of the kind of 1920s like jazz inspired party was so beautiful. Also, they made a decision to have the adaptation close and the big reveal set on a train, which I thought was really in keeping with the kind of spirit of this kind of age of crime writing. It looked really beautiful. It was slightly over the top in terms of how they did it, but actually the interior of the train and then the exterior shots I absolutely loved. I thought that they were stunning. So overall, this really made up for what the novel lacked in terms of creating a sense of like setting or like atmosphere. So that was beautiful to see. So there were things that I enjoyed about this, but I did have some problems, and I've grouped them into kind of 3 areas. The first one is a condescension towards Agatha Christie and a condescension towards the audience. What I will say on behalf of Seven Dials is that this isn't isolated to this adaptation. It's actually present in all Agatha Christie adaptations from like 2015-ish onwards. One of my least favourite things about Christie adaptations, historical dramas, historical fiction, is when they condescend to the time period that they're set in. And the Seven Dials adaptation does this constantly. In this, Bundle, the heroine of the novel and the adaptation, speaks and behaves like somebody from 2026 who was wandered into a 1920s costume drama. She will say something completely modern in tone and in spirit, and then tack on a little bit of 1920s slang at the end, like, oh, botheration. It's really quite silly and quite jarring. There's a proposal scene in Seven Dials, and when you compare the adaptation to the book, you see how completely preposterous it is for Bundle to act the way she does in the adaptation because of the like social etiquette of the time. It's an utterly preposterous scene. This is a bugbear of mine because I think it really underestimates the audience, who are actually more than capable of connecting to characters from the 1920s, in this case, who adhere to the social norms of their time. People still read Agatha Christie novels in 2026 for a reason. This also shows up in Bundle's wardrobe and styling, which really feels like you're looking at somebody from the 90s or the noughties who has put like a 20s like spin on what they're wearing. It just really doesn't work. In the Seven Dials mystery, there is a character of an inventor, and a side plot is the kind of shadowy criminal figures trying to get their hands on his invention. In the novel, he is German, which makes complete sense given the historical context of it. And in the adaptation, they change his nationality to Cameroonian for seemingly no other reason, so that when they're all together at a dinner party, he can deliver an exceptionally 21st century coded speech about African involvement in the First World War. I think that a lot of people adapting Agatha Christie mistake the absence of politics in her novels as ignorance rather than a deliberate creative choice. Christie doesn't lecture or harangue her readers, and that restraint is part of her appeal. And we have a group of writers and directors adapting her work who I think haven't quite grasped that point. The BBC adaptation from 2023, Murder is Easy, which is also adapted from a Superintendent Battle novel, makes the same problem on a kind of bigger scale. I think that kind of shoehorning these topics into Agatha Christie adaptations does them a real disservice. There are ways to pull out subtext in her novels with subtlety, but it's just completely out of place in Seven Dials. So I would really love to know what the thinking from the writers is on stuff like this, because I don't think it achieves what they're hoping it will. The second issue that I have with the adaptation is the changes to the plot, but specifically how those changes affect the tone of the adaptation. Just a note that we're still in the spoiler-free zone. I'm not a purist when it comes to adaptations. I don't mind when they tidy things up or tighten up plots. The Seven Dials mystery has a large cast of characters, arguably too large, so I didn't expect that all of them would make it over. My issue with the adaptation is that the plot changes alter its like spirit and intent. You find out really early on in the adaptation they have changed Bundle's love interest. They've added in a dead brother, and consequently there is now a grieving family. And those changes make the story far angrier and more tragic than it was in the book. And that I found quite mind-boggling. The strength of the Seven Dials mystery is that it's a light-hearted, really quite funny romp. They lose that. As an example, Bundle is meant to be really quite curious, adventurous, witty, fun. In the first episode of the adaptation, she's like smashing up furniture because she is so like angry and distressed. She's having like extremely fraught conversations about her brother dying in the Battle of the Somme. We lose the lightness and the comedy, and we also lose the romantic storyline, which is one of the best parts of the novel. They've also made a few surface level changes. The adaptation opens in a bullfighting ring in Spain for, I don't think, any reason other than it looks good on camera. So I think that they haven't stuck with the spirit of the novel, and it's actually a worse adaptation for that. And lastly, it is show don't tell. This adaptation has zero subtlety, and it really reminded me why I cancelled my Netflix subscription. I only reactivated it so I could watch this. There's been a lot of conversation recently about Netflix and second screening. So they assume when you're watching Netflix now that you're also scrolling on your phone. So they over-explain everything because they believe they don't have your full attention. A couple of examples in this. In the novel, Lord and Lady Coote, who are like successful business people of industry, don't really understand the etiquette and the manners of the society that they now find themselves in. But it is subtle in terms of, you know, being slightly intimidated by the gardener. In the Netflix adaptation, it is just hammered constantly. Lady Coote in the novel is meant to be a kind of drippy, romantic, quite like tragic figure. In the adaptation, she is rude, she's garish and brash, and it is just constantly spelled out to you that these are not upper class people, but it's in the most obvious kind of mind-numbing way. The first meeting between Bundle and Superintendent Battle, during their conversation, the exact meaning is spelled out for you as though you're entirely incapable of understanding the subtext. And overall, the effect of that is just a little bit tedious. This isn't obviously the best Christie adaptation that I've seen. It's not the worst, actually, is what I will say. I watched this on Friday night. I'd had a really busy week at work. It was a kind of enjoyable 3 hours watching it because it looked beautiful. It's a little bit mindless, and I would say in tone and spirit, it's not really Agatha Christie. Right, spoilers for the book and the Netflix adaptation will start shortly. If you don't want to be spoiled, thank you so much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Right, if you're still with me, I will assume that you've read the book and watched the adaptation, or potentially read the book but aren't planning to watch the adaptation, and you don't mind the ending of both being spoiled, because that's what I want to concentrate on here, because they do change the ending quite considerably. One of my biggest pet peeves with crime adaptations is when the casting reveals who did it. When a big name appears in what is meant to be quite a minor role, you immediately know that they're the killer. In the adaptation, they gender swap Lord Caterham to Lady Caterham. Lord Caterham is actually one of my favourite characters in the novel. I think he's so funny. We don't have to lose that with the gender swap, but Lady Caterham is played by Helena Bonham Carter. So straight away you have an inkling that she's not playing a minor kind of upper class aristocrat. The ending is significantly changed from the novel, and you guessed it, she is the mastermind behind everything, motivated by her anger and grief after the death of her son during the First World War. In the novel, the betrayal comes from Jimmy Fezziger and Lauren Wade, a friend and sister to the first victim. In the adaptation, they are reduced to pawns acting on behalf of Lady Caterham. And honestly, it's a needlessly complicated and far less effective ending. The betrayal by a friend and a sister carried an awful lot of weight and is actually a really great sleight of hand in the novel. And so the change of the ending really wasn't for me. And the last thing I wanted to touch on in terms of spoilers is when they change Bundle's love interest from Bill Eversley to Jerry Wade, who is murdered very early on in the first episode, they take away key aspects of Bundle's character. She's meant to be motivated by curiosity, not by a kind of overwhelming grief. The story becomes, especially in the first episode, like a tragic romance. It also affects the chemistry of the group who are trying to solve the murders, who in the novel are kind of like a Scooby gang, and I thought that that was really fun. It also means that we don't have the budding romance between Bundle and Bill, which is one of the best parts of the novel, especially when they get their happy ending. The changes really overcomplicate the plot for almost no gain, other than, I guess, you got to cast Helena Bonham Carter and potentially she increases the viewership because she's a big name. And I guess you get to dial up the shock value, which might obscure that none of this really makes any sense. Which leads me back to the question, why adapt the Seven Dials mystery after 3 hours of watching it? Like, I genuinely don't know. Right, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and as ever I would love to hear from you in the comments if you've read the book or watched the adaptation, or you're a big classic crime and Christie fan, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!